optimization and replacement. A little about Carolyn. Carolyn has been working on chloride reduction for over 25 years now, developing and teaching winter maintenance training for the MPCA and other clients, as well as conducting applied research on chloride and chloride reduction BMPs. And her work with water softener chloride reduction began something like 9 years ago. Carolyn has a master's degree in biology with a limnology emphasis from St. Cloud State University, and an undergraduate degrees are in biology and in chemistry. And with that, Carolyn, hey, welcome on this cold morning to our Water Issues Forum. Take it away, you have the floor.
All right, thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me to be a part of this. And hopefully I can share some things that might be new to some of you and useful as well. So I am going to talk about chloride reduction through water softener replacement and optimization. And speaking of Brooke, as you did earlier, I've been working closely with Brooke on chloride reduction through winter maintenance, as well as more recently through water softening related work. So in case we have somebody that's not familiar with why chloride's an issue, chloride is a problem because it's toxic to aquatic life. And there is a standard of 230 milligrams per liter. Way back when we started developing and teaching the winter maintenance classes, I actually did the calculations to figure out that it's approximately a teaspoon of salt in 5 gallons of water. And, you know, it is really kind of more of a permanent pollutant because once it gets into our waters, we have it's very difficult to remove, not feasible financially, basically, too. And
hey, Carolyn.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. We can't see your slides. I think Mark took over sharing.
Oh.
For a minute. So if you could reshare your screen, that'd be great.
I think I co-opted your sharing, so you're going to have to reshare again.
All right.
Also take this chance to just verbally say on this recording that we are recording this meeting.
Yep.
Can you see them now?
Yes, thanks.
Okay, so I guess I can continue. So
sorry about that.
Nothing too exciting to see at this point, so you didn't miss a lot. But so anyhow, it is it contaminates our groundwater as well as our surface waters too, and it disrupts our natural lake mixing process. So it has a lot of impacts on our waters as well as on land too. So and we have 68 chloride impairments in Minnesota, and 14 of them were added last year. So it's still a problem, and it's an ongoing problem. And we have 108 high-risk waters, meaning that they're probably likely to be listed fairly soon, as they are exceeding a value of 120. And that 230 milligrams per liter is even likely not enough to protect aquatic life. There's studies out there that show it maybe should be closer to 100 or 120. We can see most of the data that we have is in the Twin Cities metro area, and when it comes to our impairments, they definitely are associated with our impervious area, streets and sidewalks and such. So road salt is definitely a big part of it all. It's 42% of the load on the statewide basis. So it's still a big part, but our wastewater is 22% of the load, so that's a problem. And what we're seeing is that many of our wastewater treatment facilities have a reasonable potential to cause or contribute to water quality issues based on chloride. They're not likely to meet chloride limits that may be coming to some of them and some that are already in place. So the orange squares here are the ones that are have that reasonable potential to not be able to meet those limits, and they will, if they haven't already, be assigned a specific chloride limit. It's going to be unique to that specific wastewater treatment facility because they all discharge to different waters and have, you know, different dilution and things like that. That will affect that assignment. Why do we need softening? Why is that part of the problem? Well, we know in Minnesota we've got hard water. So very hard water is less than or greater than 10.5 grains per gallon. Now there's some little bit of differences depending on who you look to for that information, but there's many places that have much harder water than that. I live in Brooklyn Park. My water is like 24 grains per gallon, and it's definitely hard. And we can see there are some areas that do have soft water, and it also is going to depend on what is the drinking water supply source. If it's coming from a river, or in some cases a lake, generally that's going to be softer. But our well water tends to be harder, and depending on what part of the state, it'll vary. So wastewater is 22% of that annual loading of chloride. Our third largest, by the way, or our second largest is fertilizer. Water softening is not water softening, wastewater is the third largest at 22%. Of that 22%, 65% of that is estimated to be from water softening, from both household in the blue here and and the commercial water softening in the gray. Then there's also industrial sources. Some industries use salt, so that's also a higher source to our wastewater. So we were fortunate to be involved in 2 grant programs that the MPCA has with their newer chloride reduction grant program. And that program was created to assist communities in reducing chloride pollution at the source. Initially, those grants were for water softening. That's been expanded now. So the latest round of grants, which so far has been every 2 years, went beyond water softening. So, and this program is, just relies on being funded by the legislature every 2 years. It's not guaranteed, but hopefully it will continue. It is targeted to communities that have elevated chloride conditions, whether it's in streams or in the discharge wastewater treatment. And if you are interested in finding out when the next round comes, then I suggest you subscribe to the Smart Salting Program newsletter. That's where for sure it'll be announced. So again, the funding was through the MPCA, but there was actually 2 different sources of funding for the 2 programs that we worked with. So in Marshall and Worthington, it was through the Environmental Natural Resources Trust Fund, and in Avon and Altura, it was with the Clean Water Land and Legacy Amendment. We were fortunate to work with the Minnesota Water Quality Association, which is the organization that has the water conditioning companies as its members, and so they've got a lot of technical knowledge, especially want to acknowledge Jeff Hill, who's very knowledgeable on water softening and owned a company until he recently retired that did installations of that, as well as other filtering and things for water treatment. So our community partners were City of Marshall, Worthington Public Utilities, and then the cities of Avon and the cities of Altura. Both or all of these cities initiated a water softener optimization and replacement program. They were all a little bit different, but they all have in common that they have high wastewater treatment facility effluent chloride. So there was 2 separate grants. You can see how they're grouped together there. And they also have varied levels of hardness in their communities, and some did something to reduce that, and Avon and Altura did not. Each program had, was slightly different and differing levels of participation, as we'll see. So what was Bolton and Menk's role? We were the grant recipient, although for Altura and Avon, it was Fortin Consulting that was the recipient, and then Bolton and Menk purchased or acquired our company. So then we ended up having to amend it to allow us to continue working on that program. So we were responsible for project management, worked with the communities to talk out and identify and develop their rebate programs. We prepared all the promotional materials, rebate materials. And then we also worked with the communities to recruit local contractors. So we weren't the ones that were going to go out and do the work to adjust or replace water softeners. We needed professionals that know how to do that in place to work with that. So we recruited different ones, and that varied from community to community as to how much participation there was. We created forms. We trained the contractors with a short training program. We also then created forms for them to track the work that they were doing, as well as to calculate like the efficiency before and after, so we could track what sort of benefits the program had. We were also the ones that analyzed the data and prepared the reports. So in the city of Marshall has a population of around 13,600, 6,000 households with about 3,000 of them that are owned. Their water hardness was adjusted. They invested in centralized softening. Their hardness was very high, 35. And they were able to lower it down to 8 with lime and soda ash treatment. So they had a big advantage that now, instead of a hardness of 35, they've dropped it significantly down to 8. And at that level, some people are okay with not softening their water. Often it might be closer to 5 or 6, but in many cases, they're okay with it. And that was true in the city of Marshall. I suppose, especially after you're used to really, really hard water. They had a wastewater treatment chloride limit of 468 milligrams per liter as an interim one, and a final one of 261 is what they're shooting for. Their wastewater treatment facility discharges to the Redwood River down in Marshall. Just as a side note, I did my undergraduate work at Marshall at Southwest Minnesota State there. And Jeff Hill, who I mentioned from Water Quality Association, found out he did too. And he also got a chemistry degree from there. So that was kind of coincidental. We did both commercial and residential work with them. They wanted to kind of phase their program to try to focus on the ones where you're going to get hopefully the bigger bang for the buck initially, and then added different phases down to including do-it-yourself at the end when they still had some funds left, as well as paid for removal of softeners. They did have several contractors, including a small company, one-person company that participated in the program. The city of Worthington, similar in size to Marshall, similar number of owned households. Their water hardness was at 24, and they lowered it several years back by blending their water 50-50 with water from the Lewis and Clark regional water system. That is river water that's also softened partly. So that allowed them to lower theirs to 17 to 19. It seemed to differ a little bit in older areas of the city versus newer. And they also had wastewater treatment chloride limit, interim and final. And you can see the final is right at the 230 milligram per liter standard. They discharged to Okabena Creek. And in this case, we partnered with the utilities rather than the city of Worthington. It was with Worthington Public Utilities. And they just had one contractor that was in the city. And that was the only one that contacted us with interest. Unfortunately, he did a great job and was able to do a lot of replacements. In the city of Avon, much smaller population, 1,700 approximately, only about 471 owned homes, and not a huge amount of business there as well. This program started out focusing just on commercial. That was what was stated in the RFP, that was supposed to be just commercial. They have a hardness of 18. They didn't do any kind of adjustments to it. So this was just simply the work trying to reduce the softening from adjustments to the softeners. You can see their wastewater chloride limit is higher, 586, and final of 250, and they discharge to Spunk Creek. And then finally, the city of Altura, a really small community in Winona County, a population of less than 500 with about 180 households, and very few businesses, as it turns out, that were in their sewer shed. There was a few that were outside the sewer shed. Their water hardness was also 18, and there's no adjustment to it. You know, this small of a community can't do that kind of work. Their wastewater treatment facility also had chloride limits, 392 interim and 228 for their final. They discharged to a small unnamed dry run. So, you know, not much in the dilution area there. So why, you know, what happens with our softeners that we get all this chloride coming out? So basically the salt is used to recharge the resin. The resin basically kind of attracts the calcium and magnesium hardness ions, and the salt then flushes that. The sodium basically goes through and flushes it out, and then the brine, the chloride, comes out as waste down the drain and into you know, to the wastewater treatment facility where it's untreated. It can be a high amount when you have softeners throughout a city. So our work was to try to manage these softeners so that we can reduce the amount of chloride that's ending up discharging to the wastewater treatment facility. So we did this through optimization, adjusting the settings, and I'll talk more about that. Replacing those that are old and inefficient, removing them in the case of Marshall, where they reduced the hardness enough to allow for some people to feel like that was fine. They were happy with that water. And in some cases, it might be renovating or updating, adding something like brine reclaim. So for all of them, we gave eligibility requirements. And for replacement, basically, if it was a time clock softener, it was eligible, or if it was older than 15 years, or not salt efficient. I think we use 3,500 grains per gallon. And a grain is basically kind of a weight with the magnesium and chloride. And if you multiply that grain per gallon times 17.1, it's converts to milligrams per liter. So you get an idea of what that is. So if I look at the softener here, we can see it's pointed to what's called a skipper wheel, and there's little pins that can be moved in and out, and that tells it what days to regenerate. So it's not based at all on how much water is used in that facility. It's based on, you said it, how many days, or you know, it'll regenerate on the day where that pin is pulled in or pushed out. And so it's inefficient that way because it's not based on your water use, and it may be way off. Optimizing is we want them to be demand regenerated. So if it's replaced, it has to be a demand regenerated, which means it's using the water meter to figure out how much water is being used, and then it will recharge basically when it's, or regenerate when it's enough water's been used to go through it. So if they're less than 15 years and they're you know, at least as efficient as the 3,500, then we would optimize it, and that would be free to the person that owned it or the company that owned it. If it was replaced, there was a differing amount of rebates, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So we want to target an efficiency of 4,000 grains per pound. That's something that's been used in California and Wisconsin, and it's definitely doable. We saw much higher than that in some cases. And we want to make sure that every new softener that's installed is also optimized for salt use. low salt use. So these are the settings, the main settings that are going to affect that softener efficiency. The salt dose, there's an actual dose that you can set. And they used to come, factory with a higher dose or a medium dose. I think that's changing a little bit. They're going to be medium, and maybe even some of them might be coming at a lower dose. I think the industry recognizes that there's a movement toward, especially in communities that are having problems with chloride, that they may ban softeners, and that's happened in more out west. The hardness setting. So you can, in many of them, you'll just set it to whatever that hardness is. So if it's 18, you might want to set it to that 18. The reserve capacity, that's a buffer that allows so that you don't run out of soft water. So it'll kind of look at how much soft water is going to be left. And if there's not enough, it'll recharge overnight. So there's a little bit of allowance there for that. And usually it's 1 day's water use. And that can be adjusted because often it's set higher than that. And then the grain capacity, that is going to be removed by that softener. You'll see that when you see a softener, it might be rated as, 30,000 grains. And you have to adjust that when you're adjusting the salt dose. It lowers that capacity a bit. So optimization, if we lower the salt dose, we're going to lower our salt use, lower our hardness setting, lower the salt use, lower our reserve capacity as well. If there's also a time clock overrides, that you want to make sure is off or set for like 2 weeks at least, so that it doesn't trigger it to regenerate based on so many days. Turns it back into a time clock instead of a metered softener. And in some cases, some of the softeners have a salt efficiency mode, and you need to turn that on. So grains of hardness removed per pound of salt is how we define salt efficiency. And it can be calculated by that capacity of the softener, which is based on basically kind of its size, and the salt dose, the setting that you can change. So most of the softeners that are sold now should be able to meet that 4,000 grain per pound efficiency. There's a theoretical maximum of 6,000 grains per pound of salt. There's a standard that's been around for a while that's used in the industry they're calling efficient 3350, but we know that's not nearly as efficient as we can get. So 4,000, California's had that requirement for a long time. Wisconsin is using that, and so Minnesota for our their grant-funded projects adopted that as well as kind of the target. But we saw that there's many high-efficiency softeners out there that can reach 5,000 and up, but they have to be set properly to do that. So even though it says it's rated that, if you don't change the settings to meet that, it won't work that way. So here's how we can tell. If you look at your water softener manual, water softeners are a little complicated, I think. So I think a lot of it is set it and forget it kind of thing for homeowners. But if you look at the specifications of a water softener manual, this will tell you in many cases, they'll have this information in there, what it's rated for. So here's the capacity, 14,900 up to 33,000. If it's at that salt dose setting, 3.4 up to 18.2. And the rated efficiency is at that lowest salt dose. So we can see this is rated for 4,360 efficiency. But if I don't change that salt dose and, make sure the hardness is correct and all that kind of stuff, you're not going to get that efficiency. So just replacing a softener isn't the answer. It has to be replaced and optimized or set properly. So this is an example of a form that we used with our contractors, and we had some that they could just write in, some that were automated in an Excel sheet. A lot of them just like to handwrite them. The things that we asked them to collect, and then what they set it to, and when they optimized them. So here was an example with a couple of different specifications that they to see how they could set it too here on this top part. And then there was a calculation for them to determine the before and after efficiency. So in this case, they were able to adjust it from 2,300, efficiency of 2,300 to 4,293. Now, you'll notice I have actual water and hardness, if you can read that, of 8 grains. That's used in both calculations because that's what it's really seeing. But if they have that set wrong too, they're probably increasing their efficiency even more if they get that to the correct hardness. We asked the contractors, at least those that are working on commercial, to do an assessment of the facilities to see is there something else that could be done as well. It didn't have to be just the softeners. They were allowed to replace the resin if that would do the work of increasing the efficiency. If it was old, broken down resin, but everything else would make it efficient. Blending valve, which adds a little more hardness back into the water. And brine reclaim, where they can reuse part of that brine that's discharged. And there was also different types of technology they could use that would make it even more efficient. So, and then they could also just talk to them about modifying plumbing or things, you know, if they're softening outside water, which usually doesn't happen, but some real old places might be the case. And things like that. So that was kind of more for the commercial ones that they did that, although they could recommend some of the other high efficiency ones in residential as well. So as I mentioned, the optimization was always free for the residents and, you know, and businesses, anybody that participated, any facilities that participated. Oh, I have a typo. For replacement, in Marshall and Worthington, they did a $500 rebate for those that met the 4,000 grain per pound efficiency, and 700 for higher efficiency ones that met 5,000. Most of the ones were done at the 500 level. In Avon and Altura, they did it as a percentage, so 40 to 50% of the cost, up to a maximum of the replacement. For commercial in Marshall and Worthington, they had a chart based on water use that ranged from 500 to 4,000. In Avon and Altura, they used a 60% of the cost. We worked with Marshall a lot in doing creating a lot of things for advertising the program, trying to get participation. So we had social media posts. We created some things for them to put in the local newsletter, even some wording for radio ads. They did a video that they posted. We had website materials that we created for all of them. And city newsletters, the local newsletters for businesses, things like that, that was done to try to promote the program. And in the case of Marshall, their wastewater treatment facility staff were very involved. They learned how to do the optimization. So when some of the contractors didn't quite understand it, they could help them get on track too, because we couldn't be there with them. We, you know, it's a long drive to Marshall from the Twin Cities. But fortunately, they were very active in that. They also were responsible for managing the rebates. So the rebates would go through the city, and they'd get reimbursement from the grant. Worthington Public Utilities, their program was open to commercial and residential or light industrial too. And they worked with the only water conditioning contractor in town, which happened to be Culligan. One thing that they had as an advantage in Worthington was that the previous owner of the business, the Culligan business, hadn't really kept up with suggesting that people replace their softeners, upgrade them, where in Marshall, that wasn't the case. They had done a lot more replacements. So there was a lot of old time clock softeners in Worthington, and the Culligan had a good tracking system, so they knew where they were. So they could just contact the contractors or the customers and set up a time to go out and optimize. But in most cases, they ended up replacing them. Most people went for the replacement. So they did a lot of replacements and had big reductions because of that. They were the old, really inefficient systems. 189 time clock units. In Avon, as I mentioned, the program was initially limited to commercial, and we work with the cities to identify which ones are in their sewer shed, and then we contacted the businesses to try to get them to participate. We requested information ahead of time that we could provide to the contractors. That wasn't super successful. It was hard to get that out of them, or they didn't know any, especially if it was like managed like an apartment and the manager wasn't somebody that was on site. It was really difficult to get participation as well as to get any information out of them. But for those that did participate, the contractors did go out there, inspect and optimize or recommend replacement if that was eligible. Residential was added really late in the grant period because it was designated initially for commercial. It took a while to figure out if that could be added. So it was added late, and I think we could have done a lot more if we'd have been able to start that a little sooner. Altura, similar, again, limited to commercial initially, and then eventually we moved to residential. Kind of did similar things where we contacted the businesses and the contractors, did the same thing, went out and did it. This case, Altura, there's also only one dealer in town, a Culligan dealer. We did post on the website. If anybody else is interested on all of the websites in participating, they could contact us. There was one that did initially, but then they never followed through. Residential, again, added late. I think Altura had about 6 months and Avon only had about 3 months of the residential program. The funding, the rebates ran through the contractors in this case, except for residential. Altura did the residential ones. It was too late to get Avon set up for them to run the residential ones. So participation, not super high. Now, this doesn't include businesses. This just includes the household participation, but we can see it's tough to get participation out there. And Marshall did do some work ahead of time in having them reduce their hardness once they installed that centralized water treatment to soften the water from their water treatment plant. So there's some that had already done that, but they didn't do any of the other adjustments. But we can see, of the owned households, about 10% participation, in Worthington Public Utilities, 7%, and Avon, 9%. We didn't have that figure for Altura, so 16% though of the households did participate. So what were the results? In Marshall, we saw a salt reduction of 209,000 approximately to 320,000. The upper end is including those that were removed. And we didn't have any before and after numbers on those, so that's just an estimate that was added to that, and because they removed a lot of them. But we don't know the exact. And, none of these are exact numbers. Of that, the chloride content of sodium chloride is about 61%. So of that 127,000 to 194,000 pounds per year of chloride was removed from their effluent. 239 residents participated and 59 commercial, but many of those were rental homes. So we had a total of 328 softeners, 100 replacements, 78 plus optimizations. I say plus because there was The Culligan didn't want to do the paperwork for the optimization. So they had done, I think, another 25 to 40 that they didn't submit, but we know they were optimized. And then 120 that were removed. They do monitor their effluent closely, and here we can see this program started in July of 2022. The effluent is this orange line, and we can see the trend is an orange dotted line there, that it's definitely dropping. They're not quite to their goal yet, and it does differ for different times a year. And they also have some industrial dischargers that have kind of peak, just that they'll do it, over a day or two. So you'll get a lot in when they're emptying like a brine tank. So they're working with the industries, and they are continuing the rebate program on their own as well to work toward that. The daily max goal and theirs is the gold colored line, and they're getting close, but not quite there yet. Worthington Public Utilities, we saw a salt reduction of 212,000 pounds per year. Chloride reduction of 129,000, really kind of similar to Marshall's. And 178 residential, 30 commercial participants. In some cases, there were more than one water softener in a facility, so some of those numbers don't necessarily add up. So 178 replacements, 30 retrofits. They did some where they put in newer equipment that allowed them to adjust it to a more efficiency without replacing the whole unit. Here's their results. So they, if you look at the linear monthly averages, that orange or red dotted line that's going down there, and you can see that their final limit is that greenish, light greenish colored line, that they are doing pretty well. And if you look at their monthly average, the up and down with the dots there, they're still above that a bit, but they're definitely heading in the right direction. I think I got that wrong. That city is continuing the rebate program was supposed to be Marshall. So I don't think that Worthington Public Utilities is doing that unless they've changed since I last talked to them. And Avon, much smaller community. And again, there weren't very many businesses, so we didn't get a lot of replacements and work done for businesses until we added the residential, and so we had 15 small commercial sites and 28 residential. And as I mentioned, I think had we had more time, we'd have been able to do a lot more of the replacements and optimizations for residential. So they saw just a 36,000 pound per year reduction, and 22,000 of that was the chloride. Just as an example, here's an apartment building, so you can kind of see what changes they might see. So before replacement, their salt use was about 2,000, a little over 2,000 pounds per month, with a efficiency of only 1983 grains per pound. After they replaced it and set it properly to optimize it for salt use, they went down to about 88 pounds per month, and a much higher efficiency. So I think in this case, they must have had their hardness set really high as well, or some other factor besides just the salt dose that was way off. So not only is this much less salt being discharged from that facility, it is got to be a big cost savings for them too, and the amount of salt that they have to purchase and having to haul that salt, which is one of the things we used in social media posts is, tired of hauling those heavy bags of salt down into your basement. So this is a little different view to give you an idea where it came from. So we had residential replacements were responsible for 23,000 pounds, and then commercial 10,000. Then here we had some optimizations were smaller, and commercial optimizations 2,000 pounds. Altura, Again, really small community. Their salt reduction was 31,000 pounds. They had a little more time with the residential. They only really had 6 businesses, and they visited 5 of them. Well, I think the one was already optimized. So they did a number of optimizations and replacements in the community. This was a Culligan dealer as well. That really got to know how to do things and did it well. And so they had 13 replacements, 15 optimizations, but most of the chloride reduction ended up being from their largest commercial facility, which was like a dog food plant. So we can see here, this is the commercial one, and the large wedge here, the blue, was responsible for over 25,000 pounds per year. That one was super inefficient, and it was not functioning quite like it should, as well as, making sure all the settings were correct. But we had also some residential optimizations and replacements that were responsible for about 5,000 pounds, and then some commercial optimizations as well. Their average salt reduction was about 71% for those that they did work on. So in summary, water softener replacement and optimizations definitely can help meet those, work toward meeting those limits. I think in many cases, some work in centralized treatment may be needed. It's super expensive. Communities like Avon and Altura struggle a lot to be able to afford something like that. We need high participation to make it work. And, is it going to be enough? In some cases, I don't think so, unless you have some other component to it as well. So just kind of as a reminder that the centralized softening, or like the blending that they did in Worthington, is at the water treatment plant, not the wastewater treatment facility. So if they just did that and left it at that, there'd be no chloride reduction. You have to take that second step of working with the community to then reset their softeners or replace them so that you get that chloride reduction that's being discharged to that wastewater treatment facility. I've got a list of lessons that we learned through this program. As I mentioned, it was more difficult to get commercial participation. One thing that was surprising, this isn't it. The water softener owners often don't know much about softeners, whether it's commercial or not, residential. It is, like I said, kind of more of a set it and forget it. We did offer potential for using salt-free devices. We really didn't have any interest in that from anybody. And we're cautious about that because there's not a lot of data showing, third-party data showing that they work. And most of them are not softeners. So the public needs to understand that they are scale reduction devices. So your water's still hard. It might be easier to clean it off, or it's less likely to form as a hard scale. It's a soft scale that you can clean off. The contractors don't like filling out forms. So I guess figure out what data you really need and make it as simple as possible for them. If there's a softener or system that's assembled by a contractor, so Culligan kind of has their standard ones, but we worked with some companies that put their own together, and also some of them sell some of the standard ones too, but they don't know what those specifications are for efficiency if they're putting them together. That's tougher to figure that out. Now, they might be able to talk to their the manufacturers to help them figure that out. But so they're more likely to set the salt dose higher. They're not as likely to go to that lower salt dose. Whereas our Culligan dealers went down to 2 or 4, which are really low salt doses. So you don't get as much reduction when they don't go as low. Surprisingly, many of the water conditioning contractors, and I think especially plumbers that don't do a lot of water softener installation, really don't know how to set them for low salt use. Or to optimize them. So that was kind of surprising, even to Jeff at the Water Quality Association. We realized that couple-hour training that we did for them was not enough. So we had to work with them quite a bit, review what they submitted, and much of it was wrong initially, and had to work with them to try to make sure they understood how to do it. If there's iron in the water, contractors will adjust the hardness to account for that iron, and it can be really high. And it's kind of a rule of thumb adjustment. There is no data behind how do you figure out what adjustment you should use. And in some cases, it can be double the amount of salt that's used. So that is a big thing. And that's something I'd like to try to figure out if there's some funding to do a study to figure out what is the appropriate setting when there is iron. Chlorine is also a problem. If there's high chlorine in the water, they'll adjust it for that too, because it breaks down the resin. And in the case of iron, it kind of fouls the resin. I mentioned that some are willing to set low salt doses and others aren't. Contractors don't want to have to go back. So sometimes they'll even, cheat and keep the hardness up a little bit. And we weren't there to check. We did note on their participation that they were subject that the city could go out and check. But so I don't know how much of that happened. Hopefully not. Excuse me. If there's a source water hardness reduction, obviously that helps you get larger salt reductions. If they've already kept on top of things in their community and a lot of them have newer softeners, less likely to get those good reductions. And of course, the commercial industrial, you can get really large ones, salt reductions, but they can be super expensive in some cases and difficult to get them to participate. Excuse me. So if you were going to start a program to reduce chloride loading from water softening, you want to make sure the contractors are trained, check their work. One thing I think might be helpful if there's actually like an employee that was trained to do it and could do the optimizations and check installations by contractors. It worked really well to have the contractors work with their current customers. It was much simpler, it didn't require a bunch of work to advertise. So that's a good way to start things at least. Make sure that on the newly replaced softeners that any program includes that, just give them a rebate for replacing, but they have to be set to the lower salt dose and ideally like an efficiency of 4,000 or more. And encourage use of blending valves. We didn't have anybody take us up on the use of blending valves, but Wisconsin, Madison area has done a program with that, working with contractors or builders to install them in new construction even. And that basically some hardness goes back in. They're using so that it ends up with a 2 grains hardness, which should be acceptable by pretty much anybody. And that gives you another 10% reduction. And you could go even higher than that probably. So I mentioned training was not enough. So fortunately, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency chloride reduction program, said let's make a smart salting for water softening course, which we we've had that in mind for a while, and that just was completed, and we did a pilot training a couple weeks ago on this. So this is going to be more like a 5 to 6 hour class that will be targeted toward contractors and also a wastewater treatment facility staff for this one. So more training is out there to get into much more detail on how to optimize and determine, efficiency and things like that. So that's a great resource to have for the future. Here's what's covered in that class. And it is a certification class on smart salting for water softening certification class. Things that promoted success was having that funding. You're less likely to get people to replace it or do anything without any funding. That source water hardness reduction, a city willing to put some time into it and get knowledgeable themselves, good contractors that learn how to do it and you can trust them, and commercial participation. So with that, I left just a few minutes for questions, but I'd be happy to try to answer any.
Thanks, Carolyn. Ida had raised her hand previously, but let me know that her question was answered. So we should be good there. Also, great presentation. Thank you so much for coming today and sharing that with us. We have one question in the chat that I'll start with. I saw a hand come up and then maybe go away. Maybe someone was trying to clap. You're getting lots of applause, so thank you. How did you select the cities and other partners that you worked with?
Well, the first were, we knew that they weren't meeting their discharge requirements and thought maybe they'd be more likely to do it because they were small communities. As it turns out, that wasn't quite the case on those for the first two, which was Altura and Avon. Marshall and Worthington, Bolton Menk works a lot with wastewater and water treatment, and they were customers already, and we knew they were not meeting their chloride limits and approached them, and they thought they were too good target for communities to work with for that, and they agreed. And and they also had some match into it too, but it helped them work toward meeting their goals, their permit limits.
Awesome, thank you. Follow-up question, is this program going to continue, and are you looking for new communities to partner with?
Well, that's dependent on funding. I know that there were some grants awarded, but Brooke couldn't tell me because they didn't have anything finalized, so I don't know for sure who. I do know that one of our customers did get some funding, but they're doing a little different program, but it is for wastewater. And actually another one got it for, oh, Brooke is there. Brooke, can you tell?
Brooke has joined us. Hi, Brooke.
Hi, yes, I am here. So this is all funded with the MPCA Chloride Reduction Grant Program. So that is where the funding came for both of these two projects. And the first one that Carolyn mentioned, the Avon Altura, that was funded with the Clean Water Fund dollars. The second round of grants in Marshall and Worthington was funded with the Environmental Natural Trust Resource funds that we received. And now we have continued to receive Clean Water Fund dollars to support the Chloride Reduction Grant Program. And so we are actively in the process of working with those who applied to award some contracts. And then hopefully after this current legislative session, we will continue to receive Clean Water Fund dollars to support the chloride reduction program to help communities that have elevated chloride in their discharge and their surface waters.
And we would love to partner with anybody that is interested in having some assistance with any programs.
Great. Thanks for chiming in, Brooke. One more question here. Was there any intersection with MnTAP's work on this at all?
Not directly. We were familiar with it, so resin replacement was something that we offered. That's something that I considered for some communities that we worked with for applying for grants, is like having a MnTAP, having an intern, go out to a commercial facility and help them look for ways they could reduce chloride.
Great. Then we're at 10 o'clock, but there's one more question here. Do you think more could be done regarding cost savings on salt? And that would be more of an incentive for prospective customers or other partners? Mark, are you, well, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm not, I think if the cities are willing to invest in it and provide some, dollars toward replacement or pay for optimizations. You know, I think it could go a long way. I think that's what Marshall is doing. They're setting aside, I don't know how much per year to continue working with their residents to try to get more done and actually I know the college that I went to there has a super old system from the 60s, and they, you know, finally at the end, the city's been talking to them for a while, and finally at the very end they were interested in working, and it was too late and there wasn't enough money in this kind of a grant for I think their system to replace will be in the several $100,000 range. And I know they were maybe going to apply for one of the grants, but I didn't hear if they ever did. But I'm guessing the city will try to find funding to help that, because that would give them a big boost in chloride reduction. I think more city involvement in trying to get commercial participation for the smaller commercial ones would help too, although Marshall did a lot of that and it was still really tough.
Fair enough. Great, thank you. And Brooke has answered a couple of things too in the chat here. One of the requirements of the MPCA Chloride Reduction Grant, RFP, requires communities to have elevated chloride in their discharge or surface waters. So that goes back to what Carolyn was saying about how I was not involved, how you all chose communities to partner with. And then the chloride reduction program has a partnership with MinTap on other work that they're doing, not necessarily directly through this effort. So we're at 10:03. Are there any last questions? Otherwise, maybe we can adjourn. All right, thanks again. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
Great talk, Carolyn. Thanks for giving us the seminar. Really interesting.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
There was a laugh from all the engineers.
Yes, thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.